Alrighty. Welcome to class/week 11 of SOCB50. I know people must be tuckered out. You did your essays last week. Now things are wrapping up. We just have this lecture and then our next class. So we do meet in this room again, same time, same place. But it will just be a Q&A / study session / tutorial. So if you looked at today's slides that I posted, you'll see that the relevant terms and test or / exam information has been posted. So I won't go over that a ton today. I will save that for next week. But I will go over enough so that you can start your studying. I did decide that the final exam won't be cumulative. So it's just the stuff that came after the midterm. The essay question, you can draw on anything that you want, but you don't have to pick anything from the first half of the term. So it's cumulative if you want it to be, but there's no preference on our end which theories you use to explain the question. And I'll talk a little bit about what the essay questions, you only have to do one, you'll have choice, but I'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, so future directions. So again, we begin this week, it's sad, our little course, our little venture into deviance and, study of deviance and normality and crime and all of that ends. But this week, I want to try to bridge the study of deviance of all the independent theories we've done into the rest of your lives. So I think that using the biosocial perspective and the intersectionalities perspectives are good ways of helping you think kind of more laterally in terms of the study of deviance, crime, and normality, and kind of bring them into other courses that you take, other conversations you have. Again, the study of deviance greatly shaped everything for me in terms of my own research, but even how I think about careers, how I think about all sorts of things that I used to take for granted. The study of deviance is really just seeing how much of our behavior is shaped by expectations that we have and develop and expectations that others have of us, of what's quote unquote normal conduct. Sorry, my mic's a bit loud. So we'll see, we'll start with the biosocial perspective and we'll spend a little bit more time on that. So we'll see the biosocial perspective here builds on many of the theories that we've already discussed in this class, namely social control, strain theory, and social disorganization, in that it sees the environment as being very important in shaping people's behavior. And we'll see that intersectionality's perspective builds on those as well. But these two theories or perspectives, again, the ones I say are kind of lateral and opening to other things and other fields and other subfields and other conversations, they see that other variables need to be considered in the study of crime, in terms of crime deviance and taking things for granted, normality, that have been covered in this course. So they kind of extend the situational analysis that we've been discussing for the last 3 weeks. Remember I said this week we really build on that. We go in two seemingly different directions, but which I'll argue this week actually extend the situational analysis of crime by taking the whole situation seriously. So we'll see with the biosocial perspective, they say basically our individual makeups mediate any sort of process, our nervous system and our hormones. So again, that introduces the fields of psychology, genetics, evolution into the study of deviance. And then with intersectionalities, the emphasis is more race, class, gender, but also biology as well, because intersectionalities kind of goes one step even further and says, well, we need to include every potentially relevant aspect of the situation. So intersectionalities is usually seen as kind of the intersection of looking at people's race, class, and gender, But I think that introducing it after the biosocial perspective, you'll see how more biosocial components are important to consider too, particularly when you're looking at youth deviance, things like the age crime curve that I've discussed at several points in this class, namely how violent crimes do tend to be committed more by males than females, and that tapers off as men age, and also for women. So there are gender components, but they're linked with the life cycle as well in ways that, again, geneticists and psychologists and neuroscientists are studying. And there's all interesting research going on of cross-pollination between different fields, trying to understand, again, and you see they have different theoretical assumptions, but basically trying to understand what it is that makes people want to deviate, and when. So kind of, a separate question from is deviance a good or bad thing or anything like that, going back to Durkheim, who says it's normal. The theories we've read so far, some people really want to end crime and deviance, so going back to the classical school, others think that it can be, if a big section of the population is deviating, that can be good because it means that they're kind of like rebelling against the status quo, so that's more like differential association theory. So these ideas can take us in many different directions. So again, biosocial perspective, going into that, it is pioneered, it's not to be mistaken with, the biological determinism of Lombroso and Lombrosian positivism. And research of this field has been around, or this perspective, has been around throughout the whole 20th century, but it never really became, or very, popular or put in the limelight because of the Lombrosian legacy. So the discussion, you'll see the Rebellin et al., they foreground the work of Robert Agnew, who, for all intents and purposes, kind of established a level of credibility in the field through, as we'll see, using his theory of general strain theory, where he really tries to bring emotions and situations into the feeling of strain. Remember, we said strain was often criticized in that it's intuitive, that people have these 5 different ways that they adapt to stressful situations, but it seemed a bit abstract, and people could alternate between these different adaptations, right? So maybe you would interpret your environment in a way that you felt ideologically against, so you would rebel in one moment. So say school, you may come, you may get into class, and I don't know, you get a message on Facebook Messenger or something, some meme about school sucking or being boring, or like, summertime, having fun on the beach, whatever. And then you think, why am I in this frickin' institution? This is boring. And then, if Merton was watching you, he could categorize you as a rebel. But 2 seconds later, you may then say, well, I kind of just have to do this, even though I don't really want to be here, because I kind of want to be here because I don't want to be like out on the street, or I want to have a good job a few years down the road or something. And then he would categorize you then as a ritualistic person. So these categories we said are kind of situational and abstract. And so the biosocial perspective says, well, at the heart of those varying reactions are impulses. Remember, that was Travis Hershey talking about lack of self-control. But more importantly, not in a judgmental sense, emotions. And how do we take emotions seriously? We can theorize them and think of them philosophically, but there are whole fields of research that have been about mapping people's behavioral responses to things. And because of Lombroso's legacy of eugenics and racism, and sexism and all of these things, we've been a little bit scared to probe into this because we don't want to make it seem like, we're trying to see who's predisposed to committing crime or which genes are responsible for crimes or anything like that. But we do want to understand how people's, physiologies may have something to do with the extent to which they feel impulsive, they feel aggressive, they want to exact revenge on a person, they want to rebel against society. think about your own life again, at any time you really felt rebellious or ritualistic or anomic or any of those things, your body is stirred up. Your heart rate goes up. You may feel you're losing your mind. And these are all things that we can research. And again, as we'll see, the legacy of Lombroso kind of made asking and thinking about these questions quite difficult. So general strain theory is, for all intents and purposes, the extension of strain into the biosocial realm. And you'll see that what it does to do this, the one theory we covered in this class that was the most inherently biosocial was Hershey's social control theory. Because again, he looked at, basically impulsivity. And when he extended his social control theory into self-control theory, he ultimately argued that, crime and deviance, any sort of deviation from whatever the status quo is the result of a person kind of giving into short-term impulses or short-term gratification over long-term gratification, right? So, if you quit being on a diet, you felt that the reward of eating the cake outweighed the reward of fitting into that those new jeggings or something. Whatever that in the future, or having that partner. And that feeling, again, as we'll see, was probably very emotional, not irrational in the sense that the classical school would see it, but it wasn't necessarily something you were calculating. You kind of thought, I just want to do this. I want to play this game. I want to skip this class. I want to sleep in. These are all very kind of, feeling things. You're not necessarily thinking it through. You may think it through afterwards when you feel guilty. So general strain theory takes kind of both of those aspects. So you'll see here the parallel. He emphasizes 5 life domains. So this is really an extension off of social control theory, which kind of talked about, remember, the significance of the self in terms of self-control, the family in terms of pro-social bonds. Remember, so Hershey was very much saying the extent to which a person bonds with pro-social people and institutions. So things, you remember, pro-social meaning kind of like pro-society, pro-status quo, pro-normal things. So, this classroom, even though we're talking about deviance, this classroom should still, hopefully, be seen as pro-social in that, I want you to do well academically, use what I teach you, and to have great careers, and, if you are going to deviate, be the best damn deviants in the world, not, just hide away somewhere and like a retreatist, but shake things up if you do deviate. Or just deviate every now and then for fun, or blend in your deviance with your normality, which is what I try to do now. But not to have crises and traumas and things. So the self, again, there's that self-control component, and then the rest are those pro-social institutions. So he says these life domains shape, have been kind of behind all criminological research, and again, have implicitly been, borrowing ideas about individual biology, but for many different reasons, again, mainly centering around Lombroso's influence, have not engaged very much with the biological aspect of this. So very much like many of the other thinkers we've discussed, so like Hershey and like Katz, and all of the kind of situational analysts, Robert Agnew extends strain to the level of bonds and the level of emotions, as we'll see. My little pictures will become relevant later. By critiquing some of Merton's major findings, and Merton and the Mertonians, or the strain theorists. So like Katz, he says, is crime really a lower class phenomenon? We know that it's not. We know that people of the lower class are not prone to committing crime. We know that people can commit crime from all social strata. Moreover, we know that, if you extend crime into deviance, it would be a very silly question to ask, oh, do only lower class people deviate? Everybody deviates, and maybe it could even be people with more wealth and more status may want to make themselves even more salient. We think of some of you wrote about in terms of white-collar crime, how many white-collar criminals, for example, so people doing corporate crime and so on, they have a lot of money, but they just kind of want to be different. They don't want to conform to their familial expectations. So people that have, the whatever archetypal silver spoon in their mouth, they still may feel uneasy about that, and they may just want to do something different. And if you ask them why, maybe they couldn't exactly tell you. They could tell you, a bunch of reasons that they thought. But what Agnew says is, these sorts of crimes which seem to be more what he calls expressive. They're more like signifying a person's doubt or uncertainty about their normal life. So again, someone who let's say they have a very, from their perspective, supportive parents, supportive friends, they're in a good school. They may have some itch to, flirt with drugs or, have a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever that they think their parents don't approve of. They may just want to express and do something different. They may want to attack someone. They may want to get in a fight. They may want to get drunk. So they do things that often have nothing to do with money. Yep, Zach, did you have your hand up?
I was just going to say, in regards to the idea of crime being a lower class phenomenon, could it also be that those in the upper class usually have the resources to avoid getting formally prosecuted for their crimes?
Mm-hmm.
So that even let's say it's a much more equal balance of lower and upper class, I feel like it'd be a lot harder for those who commit upper crimes in the upper class to A, get caught, but B, also get formally charged because they can, with relative ease, fight off the charges.
Yeah, well, and also it depends. Like again, in my policing class, it's just that I taught several times. I would use the example of think of like police raiding parties and things like that. Think of where that tends to happen. It doesn't happen in someone's private mansion or private yacht very often. So you could be doing drugs and doing all sorts of things. You're less exposed. There's a great movie about that that's kind of critiquing, elitism, like cosmopolitan elitism. The Purge, a good horror movie. I don't know if you've seen it. So yeah, so it's one night a year. So it's like America 2022 or something has reached this state of chaos, and the only way that they could lower their crime rate was by making all crimes, including murder, legal one night a year. But it was kind of a criticism of inequality in America. At least that's one interpretation, because basically the poor would kill one another one night a year, while the rich were like barricaded in these huge mansions with big security systems and all of this. And then some of the people in the movie even said, they're like, yeah, this lets all the bad stock kill one another or whatever. So in terms of crime, definitely, it's that if they're arrested more, it's very much many times a function of the fact that they have little ways of hiding and concealing their crime. And so again, the biggest thing, this strain has weak empirical support, given the fact that, again, the correlation with income and economically motivated crime is quite weak, and especially for the purpose of this class, when you extend it to deviance, it would kind of be hard to say that most of the reasons why people deviate from the status quo is about money. When you think of people that just want to be quirky or different with the kind of music that they listen to, the friends they have, the games they play, whatever, those often have very little to do with money and something much more deep down, identity-based. It could be, as we saw with the persistent robbers, it could be a feeling of wanting vengeance on someone. It could be an unmet need. It could be getting back at parents. It could be embracing a new identity you thought you couldn't have. Often deviance is a function of being bullied, and then you finding, you don't want to be around certain people, or you don't want to identify a certain way. So all of this culminates in kind of the central question is, because he's extending strain, not totally getting rid of it. He said, people Merton was really onto something with the idea that people adapt to quote-unquote anomic conditions. So again, anomic conditions just being that, the world is telling me that I should be doing certain things, but I don't know how to do them, I can't do them, or I don't want to do them at a certain moment. That's basically when you're adapting to an anomic environment. It means your ends and your means aren't quite aligned, and that could be a very subjective process. Again, for someone very wealthy and with a supportive family, from their own perspective with no problems, they could somehow just feel bored and start feeling ritualistic. That's the paradox of humanity, right? We're built to detect problems. And so if you start to see good things as problematic, that can cause you to feel strain. So Robert Agnew and the biosocial perspective, again, is specifying that very internal mechanism of why is it that we start to feel strained by our environment. Because we know that many people don't. Many people, and I'm sure we've all done this, right? When you may relate some, relative deprivation is the idea, when you're feeling you have things worse off than someone else. But I'm sure we've all done the opposite. There's even a term for it. Think of the term first world problems, right? It's like when someone says, oh, I'm complaining about this, or whatever. They don't have the kind of makeup I want, or they don't have, McDonald's ran out of tomatoes, so I have to have my Big Mac without tomatoes today, or whatever the hell. That could be really straining for the moment, and then you check yourself and you're kind of, or the term check your privilege, whatever. All of these things are kind of reminding us of saying, okay, things could be worse than they are, but it goes both ways. For every time you do that, you may do the opposite of saying, why me? So again, Robert Agnew is trying to specify this. Why do we have these why me moments, and why do we have these check your privilege moments? Why do we just basically feel upset with our lot at different times, whether we know it's justified or not? So in order to do this, again, he overhauls strain theory really through the lens of social control and biology. And so the biggest thing he does, so his grand theory here, again, it's centered around subjective emotions, but then that you can, study through psychometric tests, through brain scans, through interviews, through all sorts of different things. But he says ultimately, all the 5 adaptations result in a person feeling a kind of negative energy and charge. And again, I think that's very compelling, because think of what deviance is. Anyone that knows, maybe you can deviate unconsciously, right? So let's say you come into the classroom and you're accidentally listening to your music really loud. That would be deviating, but you may not know that, right? And then if someone calls you out on it, you could be all mortified and be like, oh, what? I didn't know. But when you actually want to deviate, so let's say you wanted to come into the classroom and make a big frickin' spectacle of yourself, just plop down on the front and be like, yo, you suck, prof, if that's what you really are. You probably there was something going on to make you do that. That's not something you would think to do on every day. Maybe you think it, maybe you want to do it now that I've said it, I've primed you for it. But you probably have a lot of little voices in there saying, no, don't do that. Don't I know, cultural contradiction. I know YOLO, but at the same time, I know I need to, get through this university and whatever and get my job. YOLO 2 years from now, not now. So he says, when you deviate, you have a charge. And that's something Merton, it's in there, but he never really talks about it. And seeing people as being charged up into deviance kind of opens up and necessitates the study of biology. And he says it reframes strain as well. Thinking of charge, you then have to think, okay, why is it that people get to this moment? So number one, this can, so Merton was right, failure to achieve valued goals. So this is someone, who says, I want money, I can't have it. That's not the worst one, though. Then number 2, could be very painful. This is someone, no, don't take my glory. This is someone, they're stealing the SOCB50 readings from them. So that would be a very traumatic experience, I know, for any of you. You know, your memories of this class, whatever, someone's stealing it. Mine, right? Strain, angry. You may want to do something. And then, oh my God, even worse though. So this is the can't escape noxious stimuli. No, get away, I only want SOCB50, but you're in a university, let's say everyone's saying, oh, here, take psi, XYZ, fill, mu, bore, blah, lamb, nat, whatever the hell. And you're like, no, I only want sociology. I only want this, but I can't. But everyone's trying to indoctrinate me into other fields, and I just can't get out of this situation. So these are funny examples, but let's look at real examples, right? So failure to achieve valued goals. You know, everyone around you is telling you to do really well in school or whatever, but you can't. Maybe you have a learning disability that's been undiagnosed. Maybe you're just struggling for different reasons. Maybe you're being bullied. Maybe you really don't believe in school and you want to do something else. That would be, you know, failure to achieve valued goals. You value education, but it just isn't working. And that causes you a lot of stress. Removal of valued stimuli, losing your job, losing your partner. Those things can then cause you to feel really bad. Maybe lash out, act out. A death in the family. Those sorts of things, again, can put a negative charge in you if you feel, why me? Again, things are unfair when something really bad happens to you. And then can't escape noxious stimuli. So when you think of, gay suicides, I think the numbers have been going down, hopefully, as society's been more progressive. But if you look like 10 years ago or so, when it was really publicized in the media, that it was a major social problem, that these people were just, feeling and being bullied in school to the point where they felt, well, what's the point of me living when, I'm just going to be always ridiculed. So again, all of this is centered around the feeling of emotion. So this, as much as this, I'm making it more personal, the reason I chose those funny examples is what opening up the idea of a negative charge does is it circumvents, remember strain theory was kind of seen as being deterministic and, they called it positivistic, right? So what this does is, does strain have to lead to negative outcomes? Slash, if you frame it that way, slash deviance. That was seen as a direct relationship. Now, this is not direct to general strain theory because now you have basically emotions. This mediates the relationship. And where you have emotions, you have so many other things, but all of which can kind of be consumed, X, Y, Z, whatever. You have a bunch of things, but all of which, he says, can really be categorized coping strategies. So remember, for Merton, if you're in an anomic situation, you're more likely to feel strain. Agnew says, well, no, because again, let's say you're looking at an impoverished neighborhood, right? What if a person that's living there has amazing friends? What if they had a really bad experience with a gang member and they said, I'm never going to be that kind of person? What if what if they're very connected with the teacher? What if they happen to be in a pocket of the neighborhood where everyone is really tightly woven and really tight knit? So he says, no, what really happens is strain may cause a person to be negatively charged. Then their repertoire, their skills of coping, which again are taught to people and are a function of the money they have, the friends they have, the supports they have, the habits they've learned, they have to go through that arc before they deviate. So again, this to me is very compelling. Think of, just an example. Think of yourself, losing your partner, say. That could be extremely traumatic let's say, if you're living together, you were planning on getting married, you thought they were your soulmate, you've had a horrible history of dating where people were abusive to you and awful and all of these things. And this person kind of represented your turning point or your second chance. So your coping strategies were very weakened due to previous dating histories. You kind of felt you did not have very much resilience in this regard. So that could be very painful for you, and then you could then say, you know what, I'm going to go join a cult, or I'm going to swear to be abstinent for the rest of my life, or I'm going to be very depressed, or I'm going to use drugs, or whatever. It's just very painful and you feel you can't cope with it. Versus someone else who, let's say, okay, I did feel this person was my soulmate, but going back through my life history, I actually realized I kind of thought that about a few other people. And I have a great career right now, and this relationship was taking me away from that. So now I'm actually kind of forced to focus on that. So basically he's saying this direct relationship between a feeling strain and deviating is mediated really by that aspect of feeling. That strain does not necessarily have to lead to a prolonged emotion, right? You may feel bad in the moment, but if you have coping mechanisms, so in my mental health class, so this is called the stress buffering hypothesis, which is basically that people with more resources, and not just money, but previous experiences of stress, having been through things, what they call character developing moments, those then allow you to reframe the negative emotion. So this connects back to well-breds. Remember the roundsman and the hitmen that week when we talked about bread sales and killing. And remember the hitmen, Pete, he said, oh, I'm going to kill someone, but he had a frame break and it shattered and he couldn't do it. This is a similar process. This is saying, okay, an objectively bad situation doesn't have to cause me to commit crime because I can reframe it and prevent myself from having a frame break. That's essentially what he's saying. And so sociologically, this becomes really interesting. And you start to think, okay, why is it that certain situations prompt some people to feel so angry to the point that they have to deviate? Another example, so this is why this is important to get our heads around. He's not saying that some people are just so stoic and have no emotions and, something bad happens and I put it in perspective. It's more about whether that emotion is long-term, right? And so we can all relate to this. Think of, and I'll use an example. When I got bad grades in first year, U of T, from my own whatever expectations, this always happens to every student. You expect certain things, some you do better, some you do worse. I interpreted that very badly. I said, I'm not good because I dropped out of school earlier, I'm delusional going to U of T, I should have gone to another school, I should have taken something else. But it was short term because my coping mechanism or whatever at that time was, I looked into grad schools, I looked into law school, and I saw that you can drop some of your lowest marks. So I had the emotional response. I was quite, feeling like I could withdraw and not good and all of those things. But I coped using my research skills. And I said, okay, which I didn't really know I had at that time. I was just Googling things. But I coped doing that. Versus there are other first year students who, and I told this to my intro class when I taught it this year. I said, if you get a bad grade, it's not a death sentence academically. Some students think it is. And so so if you don't have that coping strategy and you feel the same frustration I felt it just as bad. It was horrible. I was all crying. I was so upset. I ruined my second chance, all of this. I got a 58 on my first midterm, and I didn't know that the grade was going to be curved. I didn't know that later on they lowered it. That grade didn't even count into anything for me in the future. I ended up finishing with a B+ in the class, but at the time I was like, oh my god, what have I? And this is just going to be 4 years of this. So if I were to deviate, right, it would be in this situation that I didn't have coping strategies for this. So that's where he says it depends on the person's level of coping ability. So what are coping strategies? And this to me is where things become really, because so far you're probably like, where's the biology? You haven't really been talking about that. Well, this brings in, the coping strategies, again, brings in a biosocial perspective of our capabilities and decision-making processes. Again, it's not your genes or whatever just making you do things, but it's your internalized habits, your tendencies to problem solve, to detect errors, to self-blame, to aggrandize. All of these things come in. So he says you have cognitive and behavioral options, and then there are factors that facilitate or inhibit coping. And again, these are biosocial. They're things around you, but they're also things that you're interpreting. That's the key of the biosocial perspective, that anything quote-unquote objective is always interpreted by a complex person that has a lot of different things going on. That's why I see the connection to intersectionalities as being very clear. So cognitive options, again, so this is not just, again, your biology, but it's how you were raised and the kind of friends you had and things you've done in the past. So it's not important, it's not that bad, versus I deserve it. So think of someone who is, again, think of domestic violence. This is an example I've used a few times. Think of a person who was raised to never tolerate abuse. They maybe had a family member who was in a horrible situation and they said, I would never be involved in that myself. If he or she experiences this, he may say like, no, this is horrible, I'm leaving this situation. My cognitive option, something's telling me just leave. This is an abuser, I know not to get involved. Versus another person who was abused as a child by his or her parents, or who had abusive relatives that they had to hide it under the table and not tell people about it. They may say when the same thing happens to them, I deserve it. So their feeling of strain, I hate that I'm abused, what do I do? One person might say automatically, how dare you hit me? And you can see this in movies and stuff. Sometimes when a man hits a woman, one woman will immediately just I'm never going to see you again. Whereas another one will, become very fearful, start to self-hate and say, what did I do to bring this on? And develop, what's called battered wife syndrome. And again, the correlations are usually if that person has been taught to be self-assertive, to have more feminist ideals, equality, egalitarian relationships, those sorts of women would tolerate that less usually. And men of those views would do those options, would do those horrible things less as well, ideally. So cognitive options, again, when you're feeling a bad situation, again, the emotion's the same. No one likes being hit. No one likes, some people, since there's a deviance class, there is S&M and all that stuff. But that's still controlled. That's a stereotype of S&M. They don't want to randomly be hit by people on the street. If you think of a kind of a noxious situation would be, someone pushing you on the street. I don't think anyone would like that. But people would react very differently. One person could get very scared. Another one could say, oh, I'm such a piece of crap. People are pushing me. Another one could be very angry and irate. Another one could, dwell on it forever. Those are cognitive options that we have, again, based on, our identities. Behavioral option is then, okay, the next level, this made me feel bad. Now, and you should see connections with other theories. So techniques of neutralization start to play in this process too, right? It's almost like, people that are more victimized, they will neutralize the deviance that was done against them. And I'm not victim blaming at all, but it's a tendency, right, that people will strip themselves of agency as a coping mechanism. So I did that, I was bullied a lot in school, and then you start to tell yourself, oh, well, it is just what I'm doing. I seem like I'm, people, like, they know that I'm gay and they're calling me girly, or like I'm overweight and I'm not smart in class. And then you start to internalize it, and then it doesn't hurt as much when it keeps happening. Because you're like, well, I deserve it. It's fine. Like, yeah, I just need to dress differently. It would be more painful if every time I treated it like a new thing. And I said, why are they doing this to me? So behavioral options, again, the negative situation, You then either neutralize or you try to fight cognitively. I'm going to leave this, I'm not going to tolerate this isn't me, or this is me. That then shapes the behavior that you do. So someone bullied who then copes with that situation by telling herself, oh, I am, the monster that they're calling me, they will then do the behavior which sticks around. And so that will, in their mind, reduce strain and be a positive solution. Oh, well, maybe I'll be less loud in class, or I'll lose weight. I have 2 weeks on eating disorders in my mental health class. My sister, who was anorexic and hospitalized for it, that was exactly her cognitive reaction. She was hurt. Then she said, no, yeah, it must be me. I am, fat and stupid and whatever. And then I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to, be more demure, and then that will reduce my strain. That's very different from someone else that, imagine you call someone, fat or whatever, and then she slaps you in the face and is like, go to hell. Right? And then her self-esteem is still intact, right? My sister could never do that. Maybe now as an adult, I still doubt it, because she's so fragile about that in terms of her identity. And same with myself. When I'm insulted, depends on the situation, but I'm more in the middle. But it would be very hard for me to be the kind of person that's just right away, no, you're nuts, I'm right, da-da-da. It's hard for certain people to do that. And then the factors that facilitate coping. And so again, that's why it's very important to see cope in this. That's why I'm giving the example of kind of, eating disorder as a coping mechanism, and deviance as coping. Coping strategies don't always lead to, here it says positive solutions, but remember, it's a positive subjective solution. So self-harm is also a way, more generally, to mitigate strain, right? Because you're telling yourself, oh, I deserve this. No, I don't need to go back to school. I am a dropout, and I should stay that way because people won't accept me anyway. And now that I know that, my life can be easy because I don't feel the strain anymore. So, I'm not very smart, and I'll just act that way. So that, to me, is what I think is so important about this theory of saying, it's not so simple, oh, I feel strain, I'm trying to fix the strain. When you look at people like the persistent robbers that we studied, and again, I think eating disorders and many mental health issues are a great case of this, where people fall into long patterns of kind of self-defeating, Merton called them self-fulfilling prophecies. It's not that they think it will fix their problem objectively, but they've often resigned to a new subjective reality where they're the bullied person, they're the stigmatized person. That's why it's so important, I think, to expose toxic stimuli. When people use terms like toxic masculinity and things like that, it's when people feel they can't escape it, they adapt by neutralizing it and saying, "Oh, I deserve it." So what helps people cope? And again, positively or negatively. Intelligence, problem-solving skills, creativity. That's why, and again, talking to students over the years, and I see someone who, it would often strike me when some students withdraw after having a bad experience in a class or a bad experience with a friend or something, and they've developed this big creative, really smart reason and solution for why they should withdraw. And I would say, no, don't do that. From your perspective, yes, that makes sense, but I've seen this happen before and you'll be fine in a year, or just take another course. So it works both ways. So a positive example would be, I got a bad grade in class, I'm going to put it in perspective, I can apply to so many programs that will disregard this, maybe the grade will be curbed, I don't know. An equally intelligent, but not positive solution would be, okay, well, I did poorly in this class. There's a chance that maybe the grade will be curbed, but, if I did bad on this class, I may do bad on the next class. This may indicate to me that, I actually chose the wrong field and I should switch schools. That's equally as intelligent and using problem solving, and they're being very creative because they're making all these connections that aren't there from an outsider view. But these could then lead to a style of coping, which then causes them to ultimately deviate. So again, for all of this, I'm becoming very abstract with this, but only because you guys are such a strong class. I'm upping the theory part, but it really is, and it's, my submitted my dissertation to my committee, and it's called Thinking Through Dilemmas. And the more I think about why people feel the need to deviate, it just fascinates me. And I think coping is so interesting because, you know, when you think of coping, when you hear coping strategies, it always has a positive connotation. But in the study of deviance, it can actually be quite dark and negative, right? If you decide, okay, I'm going to cope with my misery by accepting the labels that are put on me, right? You're internalizing your labels. That's a coping mechanism. That's survival for a lot of people. So here, factors that inhibit positive coping here are said to be delinquent peers, criminal disposition, weak social bonds, and all of that. But again, those can work both ways, right? If you feel you are in a society that is giving you noxious stimuli, things you can't get away from, your only coping mechanism could be to make friends with the same beliefs, friends that accept you for who you are. That's where you see differential association theory in subcultures, right? So don't get too lost up in these options, but I'm presenting this in a complex way just to show, again, you know, anytime someone decides to deviate, there's a lot going on. And so for strain theory, it seems too simple, same as for self-control. And introducing coping strategies, you then see this is why you can't predict. That's the ultimate, if you put it in one simple sentence. Because of both the fact that people vary in terms of their coping strategies, but their coping strategies may actually make them more deviant, it's impossible to predict whether people will deviate or not. And you know, again, being TMI the way I am, my coping mechanisms, you know, it's a strange thing. They worked out for me in the long run. My coping mechanisms with my, you know, as cats would say, to impose order on a chaotic past or whatever. My coping mechanism of video games, because it combined with my own, you know, intelligence, and I never thought I was smart, but obviously, you know, hopefully I am teaching all these courses to you guys. I'm not just some whatever, but I'm very creative and good at problem solving. And my coping thing, which at the time caused me to drop out of school, you know, I coped with my life by playing video games. I withdrew from formal school, but I was able to reframe all of that around and say, you know what, all the time I spend in games, I can put in school, I can do this another way. But basically, I've seen coping go both ways. So coping led me to my rock bottom, you know, and then I was able to reframe that. I was lucky enough because I had factors facilitating it, and I didn't have inhibiting. I didn't really have delinquent peer friends or a criminal disposition, whatever that is. And I had strong social bonds with people that were very close to me, and I was a fairly moral person believing in justice and whatever. So, you know, dealing drugs or whatever it's always the option. That's my unconscious option. Maybe something's telling me I should do that. But none of those things ever really seemed like they could make sense to me. But definitely the coping, I see, you know, it's originally what my dissertation was going to be on was video game addiction, and which I was framing as a form of resignation, of people kind of saying, you know what, I should lower my expectations, and just kind of go with the flow. And seeing how, again, that can cause you not to feel strain, but it can really cause you to deviate from, you know, your big ideals. Yep, Emma.
I just want to check that I understand the can you go back one slide? Okay, so there's like factors that can like facilitate coping or inhibit coping, and then there's like the outcome, whether it can be like a good thing or a bad thing. So it's like
exactly.
If it's like a 2x2.
Exactly, yeah, because he doesn't really talk about it, but that's more my addition to this, and I think that's part of, yeah, so it's 2x2 exactly, because those factors, someone more intelligent that's good at problem solving and is very creative,
yeah,
those are required. I mean, you don't have to, there's no certain thing, but the most important there is really creativity and a disposition towards problem solving. If you're a kind of person who reframes things, basically, then you're more likely to use a coping strategy. But again, as we all know, those coping strategies, as you said, that's the second issue. That's where I'm just saying I disagree a little bit with because here you can see it's biased towards seeing coping as a good thing. But like when you look at factors that inhibit coping.
So what would be an example of something that would inhibit coping but have a good outcome?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay.
Right? Because sometimes people, I was listening to an audiobook on death and dying, and there's actually, palliative care doctors use CBT to get people out of their coping strategies. Many people cope with illness by saying, I'm a burden on people, I actually do want to pull the plug, I'm not going to be able to tolerate the pain. So it's not getting rid of coping altogether. So it's not, for factors that inhibit coping can be, think of someone who becomes a broken record, saying, no, this is all I can do. Oh no, I got this grade. And again, I have these conversations with students. I'm like, the way you're interpreting this is wrong. You're using coping mechanisms that aren't helpful. You're coping with something that should just be not thought about, right? You should just try to move it. That's what CBT is all about, right? Because it's saying, like, you're dwelling, you're fixating, don't think about it, just do it. And so it's difficult to think of that in terms of this, but I think for a topic like deviance, seeing intelligence, problem solving, and creativity, those are all pro-deviant as well, right? So totally, you need those.
That one's easy to do, it's like the other.
Right.
Yeah, okay, I got it.
Right, so the delinquent peers and everything, but that's what I mean, they all work both ways.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's harder to see the other way.
Yeah. So yeah, no, and I only came up with this teaching it now. I usually don't get into the dark side of coping. That would be because it's again, you're coping in terms of your ideals, and if your ideals have been skewed through something like depression, and you say, well, and again, I just think of my sister coping and her thing leading her to her deathbed of then having to live in sick kids.
So inhibiting her instinct.
Yes, would actually have been helpful. Right, so there could be another table there saying, this would be good, not having delinquent peers and so on. But factors that would inhibit her coping mechanism could have been having good peers, having a more present mother, having all of these things that were just, So yeah, it's not debating the theory, just saying you can extend it into, again, how coping is not necessarily always a good thing. When they say things, and people know that, think of what a Band-Aid solution is. Temporarily addresses the problem. So like, for example, should a battered woman, that's a bad label for a person, but should a woman experiencing domestic violence, should she try to, cope with her domestic abuse? No, obviously. She should try to, if she can, use her, the cognitive options of saying, no, I don't deserve this, to lead to the behavioral option of saying, I'm going to leave the situation. There could be a whole bunch of other things inhibiting that. But again, when we looked at the persistent thieves as well, their coping strategy for coping with the fact that they couldn't make money was legally, was then, and interpret and to minimize their strain, was to say, well, I could never have a normal job anyway. I'm just going to rob stores every now I can and try different jobs. So again, not trying to, for the purpose of the exam, I will not make you get into the dark side of coping or anything like that. I just find it's very fascinating. And again, just my time, sad time ending. I'm very sad this time of year because my courses are all ending and I only have one course in the fall. And then I'm thinking, what am I doing in the future? But at least if I can leave my little mark of telling students not to, you're coping. I've seen so many. And I never framed them. This is so interesting how learning happens in the moment. I never really framed it as coping. I always just said, why did students have all these little quirky ways of seeing things? But then I see it is your way of coping, right? Students, when they break down and they tell me the family expectations, all of this, and all I can do is say, well, in my own way, I've been there because I was, I had 2 high school credits at age 20, and I know that those things don't work against you later if that's your goal. So if you get a bad grade, it's really not the end of the world. I'm not saying that to justify giving you bad grades, right? Imagine I do that. No, I'm going to fail the class because I just told them. No, I'm not doing that. But, or am I? I don't know. But just put things in, and that's the key. See, now I came up with it. Put things in societal perspective, right? That's the thing. Because when you put things in context, if it's your context, you're not really putting it in context, if that makes sense, for something like that, right? So if your context, if you're saying, again, if you have given up on yourself, right? So, and it's a weird thing to say that your own views don't count. They do count, but for someone, again, I think I'm thinking of Eileen Wuornos, when she decided to become, a killer of 10 people. She had said, nope, that's it. I'm now a vigilante. everyone is destined to be, you know, a predator, and I'm going to save the world. If she could step out of that, if her bipolar disorder was addressed, or whatever, I think she may have had borderline disorder or something they diagnosed later, if she could put herself outside of that one step removed and say, yes, I've had a very traumatic life, but there's places I can go and things I can do, then maybe that wouldn't have been her full context. Anyway, but that's just extra stuff to think about. So the key thing here is anger. And in the absence of positive coping, delinquence is likely. So again, coping here, even in terms of a neutral sense, if you get really mad at someone and you deal with it, you know, by putting it into perspective, whether again it's your own perspective of feeling kind of as someone who deserves to be abused, or into a more societal perspective of saying, no one deserves abuse and neither do I. Both of those reactions, even though one can kind of deflate you and one can inflate you, both of those would minimize the odds of you retaliating in the moment, right? So whether you feel bad about it and internalize it, or whether you use it as an opportunity for growth, in terms of you lashing back out at the person or getting in a fist fight, has the same impact. The impact it has on your sense of self and your ongoing identity is very different. That's why I always tell students, if you get a bad grade, talk to the prof. You know, don't yell at them, scream at them, but go over the test, see what it was, and find patterns in your own stuff. I mean, you're all upper year students now, but that's what I told people in year one. Go early, because I've seen the growth. That was a full year class, and I saw so many students, at least in terms of my class, just like exponentially grow once they're like, oh, I didn't realize I was, you know, answering these questions this way. It wasn't that I didn't get it, I was just, you know, reading too much into the question, or not writing my answers long enough, or not following the instructions, or whatever. You know, I'd have to short circuit their coping paths, which were, oh yes, I'm not a good student. Oh yes, you know, I shouldn't take sociology. I'm not creative. That's what many students told me. Oh, I can't write essays. I can't do this. I'm like, yes, you can. I'm reading your essay. You just didn't follow the instructions properly because you're reading it like the way you read it in another course. But you know, it's just a different thing. So to end before the break, so why biology is important here. So biology fits in with all this complexity and the dark side of coping and everything. Biology fits in here by mediating this process. So some people may be more or less susceptible to interpret an event as cataclysmic or disastrous, right? Again, as someone who's had cognitive behavioral therapy and been told that I am, by many people, you know, I catastrophize. That's the thing that I do. So I'm sure many of us catastrophize, and what that means is something happens, and then you automatically bring it to worst case scenario, right? Therapists, you know, and people vary in terms of that as a trait. I haven't had any like official testing or whatever, but they put me on antidepressants and, you know, gave me that sort of therapy, which I think has been useful. But, you know, essentially this is saying certain people may be more likely to go down the rabbit hole with their thoughts when they interpret something negative. Other people may be naturally more able to put things in perspective. You know, antidepressants and antipsychotic medication is to prevent people from getting in big complex cycles when events happen. It's to put things in perspective more broadly, right? So Eileen Wuornos, that's why I brought up her mental health issues, not to stigmatize her or anything, but to say she brought things to a very like final place. She was suicidal, she was ready to die, she needed to lash out, and that's not, you know, undermining all the horrible things that happened in her life, but saying she was in a place where things were very complex. And I'm sure we all know people like that, people that really see things as cataclysmic and disastrous. Something happens and it like shakes their whole core, whereas for another person it doesn't. So that's really the key for bringing in biology. So the link with I think Hershey's the most clear here. So self-control, I think we can reframe using the idea of coping I think this is why I said when sort of students ask me, what's your favorite theory? I would often answer self-control because when you really think of Hershey's theory, remember he just said crime and deviance are a function of a person's ability to really see things in perspective and go to the long term. And so Hershey says, you can socialize self-control into people, which is what cognitive behavioral therapy and many psychological interventions are. They're to short-circuit people's paths, or to create paths for people that don't have any. So you could have someone that's high, think of what anger management is, right? That would be someone who seems like a direct relationship. I feel strain, I lash out. I get back, I yell, right? Versus someone else who someone yells at him or her, and then he dwells on it for days and days and days, thinking, what did I do to deserve this? Why is this happening? Therapists would create a longer path for the angry person, right? To say, okay, think through this, delay your response. Whereas for the person that's dwelling and like ruminating, they would often, recommend either antidepressants or a therapy which can help them see, okay, you can reframe this. You don't have to go all the way there to that level. So self-control and viewing it medically makes the idea of self-control and long-term planning not just something socialized like randomly, oh, it's the way my parents raised me, but it actually takes it seriously. In terms of being about mental health. And I think right now, it's just, again, I keep talking about it, but there's been so much increases in terms of undergrads' levels of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, even of grad students, the population more generally. I mean, there's tons. So the younger generations in particular are reporting higher and higher levels of distress, right, of strain, leading to things that are negative. And so I think what this theory does is it says, well, these theories we've looked at before about self-control and strain, they're very much linked to mental health. And, so if you view them as coping strategies that, again, can have good or bad outcomes, I think it requires looking at biological components. And again, not saying that biology is destiny, but if you've lived a very chaotic life, or you are in a situation full of noxious stimuli, you need to adapt to that as a person, and part of that can be developing coping strategies that lead you to self-hate, lead you to, disregard yourself. So temperament is the key thing that they talked about in terms of a biological variable. So we know, again, that some people seem to want to seek danger more than others. This we'll see with the intersectionalities perspective. Temperament is highly gendered and socially constructed in a lot of ways, in that if you think of the natural temperament, say, of a man versus a woman, the stereotypes are that the man will be much more aggressive, much more dominant, much more ready to fight, that men will be more likely to convert strain into deviance, right? So if you hit a man, it's more likely he will retaliate than a woman. That, again, hegemonic masculinity is that men are tough and independent and physical, whereas emphasized femininity is more that women will be more submissive and ask for help, right? So, and again, that's reflected, in the data of crime and violent crimes, that men are more likely to retaliate with violence than women are, and to act violently and act aggressively and impulsively. So temperament, as we'll see, is a biological thing. You have feelings, you have emotions, but it's biosocial in that whether and you can see it through the lens of coping, so I'm hoping it's all kind of coming together, or will come together with the intersectionalities, that the extent to which you want to reduce your strain, the habits or the paths you take to get there, those can be shaped by the kind of man or woman or person you think you are, and again, your gender identity and the goals that you're trying to accomplish in that aspect of your life. So just to end it, so this has policy implications that, again, I said were not to be confused with Limbrosian positivism, although that is the the most obvious connection, although very, very different, because this is not biology is destiny, but this is, again, how our social lives impact us at a visceral level that we can't always control, and that much of our thoughts and actions are unconscious and they're adaptations to the environment. This perspective is about always seeing these two together, never just one. So it can't be confused with Ambrosian science in that way. But if you take it out of context, it can seem like the new eugenics. So examples of this, I'll have you look at the study buddy question, but they're serious questions, right? I mean, what if you were to find that certain people are just much, much, much more explosive and aggressive from birth? If you look at, say, studies that are happening on testosterone, it could be devastating, if you think, okay, we're going to pinpoint like the aggressiveness gene. Jim Fallon talked about that with the psychopathic murder gene, right? If you take that out of context, right, so the biosocial perspective would say, okay, we of course should know who has genes that will make them more likely to interpret events certain ways, because then we can intervene and help those people. But what if that knowledge got in the wrong hands and someone, like Hitler was in power and said, oh, this is evidence of certain people being, less capable and less civilized, so they should be taken out. So any study of genes always has that risk, right? That someone in power, someone could get the wrong information, or a wrong person could use that information against people and say, this prestigious school, U of T, whatever, we don't want students that have, X chromosome marker, because we want students that are more intelligent. We want students that will always be doing long term. We don't want to have to do extra coaching or something on people that may have, more impulsive issues. But so with that con, the upside becomes much stronger too. So things like prenatal care for at-risk mothers is one example. May seem a bit out of left field for this, but think of things like fetal alcohol syndrome and correlations with, having, turbulent in utero lives, so fetuses that are in mothers that were at risk, not with, normally appropriate nutrition. If you know that a kid is born at risk already to a host of problems, you can intervene with them early on in life and try to, set them on a higher trajectory. You can also strengthen environmental counterbalances. So going all the way back to strain theory, the positive aspect, because remember this was extending strain theory. If you go back to strain theory and the claim that anomic environments, so ones where the ends and the means aren't lined up, so inner city neighborhoods, social disorganization theory, areas where there's lots of gangs. If you say that those environments are prompting people into this big complex process of strain, coping, emotions, then maybe here it would say, okay, maybe we don't have to look at people's different biologies, but we can just say, the environment frickin' hurts people. And so what we can do is go all the way back to strain and then say, it's not just that people are doing these things for economics, but we're actually making them feel bad at a visceral level, and they're coping in all of these ways that we can't predict. And so it seems the simplest thing would just be to make that neighborhood more equitable. And reduce relative deprivation so that people don't get in these big cycles. That's actually one of the criticisms of CBT, that CBT says it's like, oh, you can just reframe your problems all the time. It's very individual, right? And so a strain theorist of CBT, there's a book I was reading when I was reading a lot about it, they said, if you focus on that, you would never focus on solving the societal root cause. And at the end of the day, that's always the debate in sociology, right? To what extent do you focus on changing the environment? And to what extent do you focus on your own adaptation, right? If you go too far another way, ironically, you're a positivist either way. So you always have to look in the middle, right? And that's what situational theories was. And that's what this was, the extension of that. So I'm sorry time went by it went by fast because I got too excited about the dark side of coping. But let's take a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we'll do study buddy question number 1. And I have treats up here. I'll have better treats next week, but because I want to entice you to come. But I have lovely Turkish delights that one of my favorite intro students got me. Got me at the end of year nicely, and I told her I'd share them with people. And then these fun little egg things. They're full of candy. It's really yummy if you like Turkish delight. All right, so you can do study buddy question number 1.
Everyone's going no.
Yeah, I know. I chose a bad time to start it. Okay, so think back to the video we watched by Jim Fallon on psychopathic murder. Again, remember the psychopath gene. How might that example be viewed through the biosocial approach to crime and deviance? Could it be seen as an extension of general strain theory? Explain. Oh, and I'll give you little cards. Sorry, I'm all discombobulated. No problem. Sorry. Yeah, so remember when I asked you about this early in the year, it was about how it related to Lombrosian positivism. So now I'm saying, given what you've learned in the class and what kind of general strain theory talks about, how does that discussion of the psychopath gene fit the biosocial perspective? Remember, the idea was that it was a gene that had to be triggered by the environment. So it was the psychopath gene. It was if you had an early childhood trauma, that then the gene was activated and then could kind of prompt psychopathic thoughts. So I was going to show you something while you're doing that. Oops. Oh no, that's not what it's called. Wait, what's it called? Stun. It's a year ago. What the heck? What date was that? July 17th.
Oh, shoot.
So I went, talk about dark side of coping. Anna. Huh? I'll wear that lit t-shirt. See, dark side of coping. Lit.
You typed for a second?
Yeah.
You lost the JDM.
But I beat him too. I beat him too. He lost to lit. Look at all these people that lost to lit. 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 But the weird thing is, that's not even the game I wanted to come to. The game I came to, I did not as good in. But it was good, because these people play more serious. But lit came fourth. But I don't feel that bad, because look who I lost to. I lost to the first place, and I lost to the second place. So I should really be, but so did he. But see, so I haven't played that game in years. I wanted to be on the stream, and I was so mad that I wasn't. And then I'm like, because the tournament started late. But I'll go again, my dark side of coping. And lit, Lawrence Williams. Huh? Nina and Anna. So I was actually, because I haven't played in like 3 years, but I just all muscle memory. And then I was better, it depended on who I played against. Because I still have my little tricks. So I know, even though I didn't know the new moves, I was playing like it was 10 years ago. I know. No, he did beat me. The website, they just didn't even update it. So I'm really second, but.
Are you encouraging him?
Encouraging my dark side? I know. It is. I literally, because it was 3 days before my birthday, and I always go a little bit weird around my birthday, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to get it out of my system. I'm going to go to a tournament, and then I'm going to feel like, and again, it's so horrible and judgmental. I'm going to go to a tournament, and then I'm going to see like, okay, this is what I left, and then I'll feel better. And then it was traumatic. I was there for like 6 hours. I'm like, I didn't even eat dinner. I was all weird. And then I left, and I was like, oh my God. I don't know, it was like, I don't know. Whenever I go to those tournaments, I always leave feeling I have like PTSD. Because I'm just like, it reminds me of my old life so much.
Is that one of your coping mechanisms for the loss?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, but I say like, well, screw them, I'm here, right? Exactly. No, but sort of. I did better than I thought I would, so it was funny. Exactly, right? I came in with low expectations, although I will say the emotion, when every round I lost, I was still like, damn it, because I used to be so competitive, so that didn't go away.
Used to be something?
Yeah.
Was there like a prize or something at the end, or was it just fun?
No, it was like it was very cheap. Like the tournaments were like $1 or $2 to enter, so I think it was like $5 for winning or something.
$5 It's like a deal that wins. That's worth it.
Yeah, but it's one of the Smash Bros tournaments and see how far. All right. So does anyone want to tell me if they think that Jim Fallon's work could be seen as conforming to the biosocial approach or extending the general strain theory? I heard a lot of good discussion. Yep.
So the environment, which is the trigger, can kind of activate the expression of that gene, which can charge their thoughts, and that motivates them to act in deviant manner, and that serves as kind of an external motivation.
Yeah,
Explain that all that.
so it would be like, if you have this, it would be trauma to like negative. Yeah, so it would be like trauma activates, which then negative, like that. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was more just to show, again, how I just wanted to make sure, and I read your responses to Jim Fallon too, because I don't think anyone really interpreted him as being, biological determinists or anything, because the key in his argument is that, we all in this room could have that gene. I mean, he ends the video with that joke of saying he might have it, and his kids might have it, and he was brain scanning everyone in his family. And that really, it was a sociological argument at the end of the day, because it said, okay, maybe we should assume that people have behavioral problems and stuff, because if we assume that, then that will mean we have to help ensure that people have adequate social supports, right? So in a way, it could be better to assume the worst of people. And then you think, okay, well, we have to make sure society is very stable so that people can't have these genes activated or whatever. So I don't think, it doesn't have to be taken in the direction of saying, okay, let's find out who these people are and get rid of them, but more, okay, let's create a society where even someone with some yet to be found gene or latent or something else dormant, where this would not be activated and we would have coping structures for them and so on. So this, I have less on this because I've been weaving it throughout. But I think, so basically the intersectionalities perspective, it focuses on how, this big messy coping strategy thought process. Intersectionality sees people as very creative and very active in their decision making. And so their decision to deviate is seen again, like in classic strain theory, as people making the most of the means they have available to them. The biggest intervention intersectionalities makes is it really it combines a lot of theories implicitly. So remember differential association theory talked about subcultures and there being groups of individuals that then create values that kind of resist the status quo. So intersectionalities, when it talks about different ethnicities and different genders kind of having different ideals, it sees that many cultural values again are the product of adaptation to strain. So many of the things again we'll see in particular when they talk about black masculinity. Due to the history of slavery in the States, institutional racism, lots of lack of opportunities in many neighborhoods, black males, according to intersectionality perspectives, living in those sorts of neighborhoods often view masculinity differently than someone who's white, upper middle class in a neighborhood with lots of opportunities. So masculinity, remember I said the kind of go-to reaction of feeling strain. For someone with a lot of resources, they may be less likely to lash out or be violent because they don't want to lose those resources and they've been taught not to act that way. But for someone without a bunch of resources, it may seem more rational or may make more sense to lash out right away. And so I'll give you those examples later. So structured culture and offending, so situational studies have looked at, again, how males commit crimes related to status, independence, strength, autonomy. But we've also looked at how race and place shape these interpretations. Again, I think of myself, okay? So I don't think I'm the most stereotypically aggressive macho male in the world. And much of that has to do with the kind of coping strategies and mechanisms I've had in my life. It never made sense for me. I mean, I didn't grow up in a great neighborhood or anything, but I grew up at the Scarborough and North York border, Don Mills and Finch. It was okay. It was fine. It's very different when I was a kid than it is now, population-wise. But it was, a little bit rough. But it never made sense for me. It was not a way of me building capital or whatever to be tough. I kind of fell into video games. And I still had my autonomy and my independence and my status. I was very competitive that way. And, you know, I'm competitive with school now. And so I live all those things, you know, but those didn't lead me to crime. Those led me to drop out when I thought I could be a pro gamer. They led me to form tight connections with people that I thought were like me. But for many other people in my neighborhood, they became the people that bullied me. They became the people that walked around in you know, small kid gangs that were tough and that smoked and did drugs and other things. So structural factors had a key role in that, right? So for me, being white helped, having family that was, you know, I had a lot of very creative people on both sides of my family, for better or worse. But they're very thoughtful. People think a lot in my family. And so I was always just more contemplative and strategizing and thinking weird things than I was, you know, out and playing sports and doing activities that may have made me more likely to walk around the streets and you know, pick fights and so on and so forth. So my agency was structured by, again, you know, ideals of what it meant to be a man, and even just things, you know, adults would tell me of, you know, boys don't cry, and my dad telling me not to be a wimp, and so on and so forth. So those definitely impacted me, but my specific situation, again, of someone who maybe biologically, genetically is just not super aggressive. I am competitive, but I'm not, you know, someone to pick fights or really retaliate or anything. I would more think first, and not necessarily in a good way. As I said, it could be quite dark and bad, just like my sister with her eating disorder. I think that's more the predisposition we would have towards things, of really thinking things, mulling things over. So the big structuring factors, again, and why, so all, you know, we haven't introduced gender, but the biggest correlation with crime is gender, right? Almost men outnumber women in every kind of crime, and usually by, you know, major proportions. And so the biggest explanation is hegemonic masculinity versus emphasized femininity, which again are fancy ways of saying norms, gender norms, about which shape expectations of what men and women not only can do, but what they should do. What's appropriate and what's deviant or not deviant. So for men, it would be deviant to not be competitive, to not be independent. So to be uncompetitive, to be dependent, to be irrational / emotional, and to be weak, those would all make a person feel deviant. And again, in the sense when I was bullied for being effeminate. I was bullied for, at many times, not being smart because I dropped out of school, not being independent. That was the biggest issue with my parents, and not being competitive in like for normal things because I was just kind of checked out. For women, it's kind of everything is the opposite. So again, the ideals of, you know, emphasized femininity, of being really girly or womanly, or elegant or whatever term, are being dependent, passive, pure, and weak. So again, someone, and you can see the connection with crime and deviance, someone who's dependent is not going to be committing crime because they're going to be depending on someone to do that for them. Someone who's passive will not be deviating and committing crimes. They'll be more the conformist, according to Merton. And women did score higher on being conformists than men, not in the usual sense of the word, but of accepting things. You know, that's why there's battered wife syndrome, but there's not, you know, battered husband syndrome or whatever. It's again the thought process, the automatic reaction, because of the norm of masculinity and femininity. If a man is attacked, again, he's more likely to think of retaliation because he doesn't want to seem like a weakling. Whereas for a woman, she might think, well, obviously I'm not going to attack back. I'm going to get someone to intervene, and you know, that's just not what I'm going to do. Obviously, men and women vary in terms of, again, there can be much tougher women and less tough men. I think if you were to push Ronda Rousey or whatever, she might kind of break your neck or whatever the stuff she does in MMA is, right? That would be very different than if you, you know, if you pushed me. So the big example they use of this taking shape is black masculinity. Again, we haven't talked about race a ton here either. But intersectionalities, again, extending the situational school, says you always need to see everything that's structuring, everything relevant that's structuring the situation. And so those ideals of independence, autonomy, and strength and rationality, these play out differently in a situation where people have less opportunities. So it's not about being black. It's not about that. It's more about the neighborhood. So going back to social disorganization. Here, how would you show that you're tough, that you're independent? Competition through physical fights. So Elijah Anderson has a great book called Codes of the Street, and basically it's rather than being tough in the corporate boardroom, becoming a lawyer, becoming some high power attorney. For many of these men, they can become gang members and tough on the street. So that's how they form their hierarchies. Heterosexuality, so very, very strongly policing homosexuality, bisexuality, as signaling again, being effeminate, being weak, being dependent. So when you look at a lot of cultural output in those sorts of areas, rap music lyrics and so on, they're very gendered, very violent a lot of the time, and very much about sex. That's just another arena where they can, minimize strain. And then use of violence and responsibility for oneself. So again, think of how, I know when I went back to adult school, many other high school dropouts that were returning back, a common story was, I'm turning my life around, I'm strong, I'm there's a lot of wanting to feel independent and very resilient, of not feeling like, oh, I'm just a product of my neighborhood, but I have to do this. It's very individualized. And so Kat said, quote, "Street robberies are a form of masculinity accomplishment for disadvantaged black males because robbery provided an opportunity to demonstrate dominance over victims." So we saw this too, and it's not limited to gender and race. This is a more typical pattern that he talks about. But think of why I showed the clip from Monster. Eileen Wuornos kind of defies even some of this by being, she's a white woman, but given her history of abuse by her family, by men in the sex, basically, low-level sex work, she then imposed order on her chaos by becoming a vigilante, killing people that she thought were potential predators. It's very similar to someone who joins a street gang or wants to rob people and jump them, preempting things they may do to them first. When you see gang battles, between Crips and Bloods, they try to kill each other before they can get one another. It's often living in this almost fight or flight mode of high stakes competition. So again, it has nothing to do with race. It's not becoming like Lombroso at all. Intersectionality is the opposite of that. But it's saying, looking sociologically at this, it does seem that people are adapting to strain and societal enemy and unfairness and relative deprivation to the best of their abilities. And so when you see patterns, it's important, again, to see it through the lens of what they call the choice within constraint framework. And I think that's a nice framework for really wrapping up everything in this course. I mean, that's part of why I chose this. I mean, I think the idea of choice within constraint, it sounds very, it's almost like Soc 101. It's the idea that we all make choices, but we all have constraint. But I think that seeing deviance and even normality, to flip it around, I think seeing deviance and normality as choices, and not just one that you make. Again, I encourage you to go through your life events and see, okay, when did I really make a decision to deviate? When did I make a decision to conform? When did I make a decision, to be hard on myself or to, give myself a pat on the back? I think that, many times people are very, in terms of just looking at deviance, we began the course by saying, scholars either saw that in the classical school, everybody was pure, but they were just choosing irrational means, and society had to tell them not to. So we have a tendency to see people that way as just okay, remove the strain, and then everyone will be fine. But then we also have another tendency to really individualize deviance and lack of normality and blame people and say, actually, it's your fault. It's not society. Society's fine. So I think choice within constraint helps see with general strain theory, or biosocial and intersectionality is all seen with that, seeing that we all have the ability to deviate or conform, and that it's a process. It's not just a flip of the switch thing. You don't just say, okay, because of my early childhood trauma or whatever, I'm now going to be a deviant. We construct identities. We say, okay, my status quo doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to do something different. That could be interpreted as deviance by a sociologist or by your community. Part of you may want to do that emotionally. Part of you may want to do that to minimize strain. Part of it may you may have some new journey you're on of getting back to someone, proving someone wrong, proving someone right. I think choice within constraint again forces you, and I know you all wrote your essays using multiple theories, which I wanted you to do, but it forces you to say, okay, what really was going on in that person's head when they decided to deviate in whatever way? Or if I'm looking at a group, if I'm looking at burglars, what do I think is the most kind of common set of factors that could cause a presumably normal person to want to do this? So I hope that, as you go on living your sociological lives, you think of deviance as not just being about crime and deviance. Again, this is inspired by, I have a class, Deviant Careers, and even my social psych of work class and my mental health class, and my quantitative methods class, all of them are about stats is about deviation, deviating from the norm, right? Outliers. That's where the word comes from. But everything we do is deviance. So I'm just going to give you a fun, I might as well. So just to the proof in the pudding. Deviance. Deviance. Our nice little videographer is like, what the hell is going on? Deviance. So just careful. This is the deviant path. This is the cycle of the line of deviance. I'm going to hit that stupid thing. Oh no, I almost fell down the stairs. So just be careful if it hits you, but it shouldn't. Oh! Whoa! I'm sorry. Whoa. Whoa, that was intense. If anyone wants to throw the deviant eagle, you can. That's, you can't... That escalated quickly. That was intense. It just like nosedived right away. That's what happens. See, that was a combination of forces. Me not knowing how to throw paper airplanes and that being from Dollarama. So it just combined and it was like, whoa. Anyway, sorry. At least you have something you'll always remember. Always remember. It was hilarious. I went right in between them. It's like,
Was that even though, like, is anyone looking down upon you for this?
I like how it makes such a loud thud. Like it's like, boom, it just nosedives. Okay, wait, I'm going to do a good one. Okay, careful. Watch your computers and stuff, because I throw this violently. Why does it always go? Boom, it like crashes. It crashes when I do it. Okay. See, we have the same thing. It crashes. Okay, anyway, so that's all I have for today. If you want any eggs or anything. So the tutorial tomorrow is canceled because we figured it makes sense to go over the final exam and stuff next week. I don't want you to, we still have a lot of time because it's August. Again, this course, it would usually, I've taught this class only 2 times before, but both times have been like a condensed summer semester. So usually the test would be like literally in 2 days. But I have the slides for you again, just in terms of planning. Everything's more conceptual this term. So there's no definitions. It's just 4 short answers, 1 long answer. You don't have to think of it as an essay. It's not worth that much more. But this is worth 40% of the final grade. So 4 out of 5 short answers, 1 out of 2 essays. The short answers will be like, what's the reflexive management of desire? What are frame breaks? Show some examples. So there'll be big concepts that we talked at length about in lectures. There will be no surprises. They're fairly short, just on the big concepts. And so next class we will, so I have the list of concepts. There won't be anything that's not there. So again, this is things are much bigger this half of the term than the first one in terms of high concepts. So it's really understanding, what's the foreground versus background? Why did Katz argue we need to study the foreground? Why is persistent robbery a good case study? Again, connecting it to things like the biosocial theory. How is it that people, why would someone want to keep convincing themselves that crime makes sense even after they've been arrested? What's differential association theory and why did Sykes and Matza kind of critique it with techniques of neutralization? What are situational theories and how do they link up with these kind of quote-unquote future direction courses? So before you go, so I'm open to ideas. I know Kahoot, I used Kahoot and Mentimeter and all that stuff in intro because it made more sense. But we don't have multiple choice. But Jason and I are thinking of what activities to do. What do lit kids do these days? What kind of activities would you like for the because this is designed for you guys. It's fun for me next week, and Jason will do whatever. What would be useful?
Jeopardy?
Jeopardy. Okay. So how, but like just like online answering things, or?
Yeah, if you go on the screen, like you make teams, and then we pick like the points and the questions.
Okay.
Have you not played Jeopardy before?
I have, but it's 3 people in person, not like, yeah.
And the winning
I'm using my notebook. Oops.
1% bonus on their final.
Yes! Okay, yeah, I'll do teams. I'm happy to that. Jeopardy, teams, okay. Jeopardy, teams.
Competition, motivation.
Anything else? Kahoot's fun. I know, there's just the problem that it's, well, yeah, I mean, I guess Jeopardy would have to be multiple choice too. It's just, Jeopardy's fun. Yeah, that's why Jeopardy, I can make it longer, so, yeah. Okay, I'll think of that. It'll force me to make good questions. That'll be fun, yeah. Exactly. Everything has to be, we're forcing us out of deviance. Okay. All right, so if I don't see you next week, again, thanks for being a wonderful class. And if you're around in the fall, I'm teaching Sociology 44, my advanced topics, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. So if you need one of those dreaded D-level seminars or whatever, hopefully mine won't be so dreaded.
Wait, what's it on?
It's on career decision making. So should be useful as something to graduate with, to take how you think about careers. It won't be all traumatic like this course. It'll be, again, how careers, how to choose them, how people get stuck. My partner will come in. He's coming, because I'm teaching at St. George right now. And he comes in and talks about his career transition from a behavioral teacher to then like an e-learning MBA making, and then now working at like a software company. So it's about how people deviate from their own career expectations and looking at like dominant social psychological theories of work and motivation and job satisfaction, kind of like a survey course of all of that. And then you do an essay just on any kind of career that you're interested in studying and how you would use a couple theories from the class to make sense of it. So my courses always kind of have that kind of essay. All right, but see you next week.